So a couple of things before we introduce our presenter. Mike Hogaterp, where are you, Mike? There you are. Maybe come on up here for a sec, Mike. So many of you will be aware, those of you who are Canadian side or those of you who are from the US who have been able to set aside the addiction of the United States of America of picking the lint out of the American navel. Those of you who can look north beyond the basketball game tonight, and we the North, will be aware that Bill 262 is stalled at the moment in Senate. Bill 262 in Canada is calling on the federal government to implement the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, the UNDRIP. And it has several senators who are seeking to block it. It has passed the House of Commons, and there are several senators seeking to block it. And as Mike talked to me this morning, he suggested perhaps we might want to consider as a community applying appropriate encouragement to our members of parliament and the senators, etc. So Mike has, on our behalf, drafted something that we don't need to listen to at all, since when Mike was in my class, his papers weren't all that good anyway. But Mike's drafted something that might be helpful for us, so just listen up for a sec.
So thanks, Terry. Our colleague Jennifer Preston of the Quakers sent a note around to a number of us in the advocacy networks yesterday. And she mentioned that she and Senator Lillian Dick were in the lobby of the Senate yesterday, and Jennifer said to the senator, "What happened?" And the Conservative whip, Senator Don Plett, happened to walk by at the moment. And Senator Dick said to Jennifer, "Well, it happened because of him." And what happened was the bill was essentially sidelined, at least temporarily. The problem is the Senate only sits for another 2 weeks. So its time is precious, and because this is a private member's bill, its time is extra precious. So the delay of yesterday and the day before could actually be fatal to this legislation. Senator Plett, upon hearing Senator Dick say what she said to Jennifer, basically said, as Jennifer put it, "Too bad, so sad." It's shameful in an era of reconciliation, when that senator was actually appointed by Prime Minister Harper, who uttered sacred words of apology from the floor of the House of Commons in June of 2008. Without further ado, here's a possible declaration from this community, NAIITS, on Bill C-262. So it reads as follows: NAIITS, an Indigenous learning community meeting at Tyndale Seminary on the homelands of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee peoples, June 6 through 8, 2019. Declaration on Bill C-262. At our symposium this week, we've been reflecting on Creator's gift of land. Land is a gift that ties all of God's children together as family. We acknowledge all people living in this land called Canada as family, as relatives. Thank you, Ray. Therefore, we come to you, respected parliamentary leaders, as relatives. Many communities have responded to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 48 and have affirmed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework for reconciliation. Reconciliation draws us to right relationships among people, Creator, and creation, and the Declaration provides an excellent set of tools for that journey of reconciliation. Bill C-262 will move reconciliation beyond a set of noble statements and commitments into tangible legal commitments that draw us to mutual respect as relatives. The final report of the MMIWG report this week reminds us of the urgency of real steps for reconciliation. We are concerned to hear reports that Bill C-262 is meeting procedural roadblocks and is at risk of dying on the order paper. Because reconciliation is more than words, we urge you to pass Bill C-262 as soon as possible. Respectfully, all of us. I offer that to you as a draft for your consideration.
So we are not a parliamentary body by any means, so it isn't that we're going to take a vote or anything, but I just wanted you to know that this will be reflected on very briefly this afternoon, and we'll put it forward, is my guess. Simply because the topic that we're on today and yesterday and tomorrow is about land and place. And if we were listening to Ray last night, it's about treaties as not only a creation story, but a creation story of an extended and expanded family and a welcome of family. And it's tragic when your family turns against you. So we want to do this in a good way, and Mike, thank you for drafting that on our behalf. And I know that it's close and dear to your heart. So thank you for listening. If you have some words of wisdom for us on this, please see one of the members of the board or Mike, and let us know what those are, so that by the end of the afternoon we can get this before the powers that be. Sherry get here yet? Sherry Russell? No. Okay, Beth?
Hello again. I never say anything very significant, but I get to speak fairly often, so that's pretty good. Tonight, just want to let you know, we'll be starting our ride list for tomorrow. There's just a way to help you connect with other people that might either like a ride to the airport with you, or you might like to offer a ride to someone. So that'll be happening in the foyer when you come back after supper. Also, you'll want to look over the sheet that you got in your folder where it describes the marketplace sessions. So tonight you'll want to be choosing 2 of those sessions. They follow one another, and those sign-up sheets will be out when you come back from supper as well. So please read that over so that you can make a decision. The reason we need to do that tonight is because we have rooms of different sizes, so we need to be able to determine which rooms to use. So we do need you to do it ahead of time, which we don't always. You'll be glad to know that the coffee this afternoon will be plenteous and will be served in the cafeteria. So you will not have to crawl over anyone to get to it. Also, we are making our sign up for USBs of the papers for anyone who would like one. They're also are uploaded onto the website, which is probably the most efficient way to get them. And we are making a very small number of paper copies. If you dearly, dearly desire one, you might want to give me your name, because we're only making a few, and it's quite a production, so we won't be able to make any more. And my last thing is, Chris has a slide there for us, I think. Okay, so first one on the top there, that's my drawer at home. Question is, what do you do with that lanyard after you're done with it here? I've been at about 6 or 7 of these. I have 6 or 7 of them at home, all with plastic things on them, et cetera, et cetera. So you can use them as a leash for your dog. You can give them to your child to carry their flashlight around. You can put them in your drawer. You can hang them. You can do a lot of things with them. However, if you don't have any great desire to take it home, we would like to recycle them this year. They were made very lovingly for us by Casey Church's daughter, Shandine, and we just like to save them till next year. If you don't have some great desire or need for them, you're welcome to take them if you'd like to, especially if you're an international visitor, you like to have it as a souvenir, that's fine. And that's also why we intentionally made the bottom part not to be plastic, because if you spill coffee on it, we will give you another one. But the paper part is also recyclable. So we will be really trying tomorrow to help you do that by having people to collect them. If you would be throwing it in your drawer, we'd just as soon if you'd leave it here, and we'll give it to you again next year. Thanks.
Do you have the bio sheet?
That's for tomorrow. No, I don't. I did not get one here. No, there's not one in here. No.
Okay. All right.
Also, we have these, you may have seen them before, Through the Pain, which was produced, I believe, by My People. We have some free copies of this. It's for people ministering to people who are struggling with suicidal issues. They're on the table out there, and please help yourself to one, or if you want to take one to someone else, there are quite a number of them there for you, as well as some journals that are on fire sale at the back. For a very good price. So $5 for one and 3 for $12. So please pick up some of those if you'd like, or any of the other items. Jerry Chasson, who does silver work, has some items there, and of course Casey has his books. And Common Word has some great materials there that they have brought in order to share with us as well. So thanks.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you very much. Now, has Sherry now arrived? She's gone to the airport. Really? Okay. So, were you aware of this, Robert, since you're her husband? Oh, not until 3 seconds ago. Okay. So perhaps we need to work on our communication skills a bit more or something. Yeah. All right. Well, so our presenter now, Keith Starkenberg, as we mentioned earlier this morning, this is the first year where in vetting presenters, we went through actually a very formal process since we had so many applications to present. We ended up with, I think it was 36, which is pretty historic. In the past, we would get 3, and then we'd figure out if we could get Adrian to speak again. So if you look through the journals, you'll see Adrian Jacobs is fairly prominent. And of course, we were always shocked and blessed at the same time with all of that. But we had a lot of presentations, and so we put them through this process for the first time this year of reviewing the presentation, saying how does this fit with our community, our context? How does the topic and the thesis of the proposal to present move us forward in the conversations and so forth. And so our selection team looked at Keith's paper and Falling and Standing, Learning a White Theology of Land in North America. And we saw it as a very colonial piece, since we were going to learn how a white theology of land should fit for us. I'm just teasing Keith. But we saw it as a teaser for us that we needed to have here, and so we wanted Keith to come and present. So Keith teaches theology at Trinity Christian College in Palos Heights, Illinois. Keith is a native of Rapid City, South Dakota, which is where the World Christian Gathering on Indigenous People, Volume 2, happened in 1998. Were you aware of that? Okay. His scholarly work considers the intersection of the Christian doctrine of the resurrection with a spirituality and ethic of place. He's married, has 3 children, one of whom is here with him, which is great. Enjoys watching college basketball, and I hope watching the Raptors kick butt. Praying outside if the temperature rises above 50 degrees. That's it? That's your threshold? Holy. Obviously, you don't want to live up here. All right. Well, Keith, come and share with us your thoughts and ideas, and we'll look forward to it. Welcome here.
Thank you very much. So this morning, when I was at the plenary, when Allison started speaking, all the words she used to introduce herself, I was like, just a ditto for me today. I felt I have not been to this symposium and to NAIITS before. I've gotten to know a few people the last couple of years who are associated with it, and if you need somebody to blame for what you're about to hear, you can blame Doug Anderson. Can you see here? Yeah, there he is. See the hand over there? He can blame him for everything that goes wrong in the next half hour, 45 minutes. So let me just tell a quick story about how I got to where I am, and then talk a little bit about the structure of what I'm going to do. Then I'll talk about what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll have a few questions about it. So the first thing I want to just say is a quick story. I currently live in Homewood, Illinois, which is a suburb in the south suburbs of Chicago. Okay, so I've been there since 2008. I teach at Trinity Christian College, which is on the south side of Chicago, southwest suburbs. And I started thinking about place because I moved there. In 2009, about a month after my wife and we bought our first home in Homewood, Illinois, we were walking around in the spring. It was above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And we were walking around the spring just trying to get to know the neighborhood a bit, and we found a couple of people to talk to kind of get to know who the neighbors are. And we were standing on the corner near our house, and we were kind of pointing at these houses, and the neighbors we had just met were pointing to this house, and they would describe who was there, who was there, who was there, who was there. And then we got to this house that was right across the street, and this neighbor who we had met, 10 minutes earlier said, and that house there is empty. And he said, but I'm really hoping a black family does not move in. And he said, and I kind of just did, I had moved from Charlottesville, Virginia, and I did a double take, and I kind of looked at him, and he said, well, I'm not racist or anything. I just don't want my housing price to go down. And what happened to me after that event, I still hadn't finished my dissertation, but I probably should have quit the old dissertation and started a new one at that moment. That started getting me to think about place. Why is it that he was so willing to think about where he lived as something that was simply reducible to a dollar sign, which then empowered him to think about himself as a non-racist or even an anti-racist in that particular context? What was going on there? So that sent me on a long journey. Race and place were connected, and then all of a sudden, as I started to think about that more deeply, I started to realize that I was from the Black Hills of South Dakota. I had grown up with Indigenous people, and there were many, many ways in which I realized that I myself was embodying and participating in a colonial enterprise that I probably will never be able to fully shed. So what I'm going to talk about today is how to shed this as a theologian, as a practitioner at some level. Some of this, for some of you, is going to be maybe old news. Others of you, you might have something in it that will help you push forward. And then the other thing I want to say is I teach in a context, I'm a systematic theologian, but I teach Bible to undergraduates. And I teach a Bible to undergraduates, a lot of whom are white evangelicals. And what I'm trying to do in my work is trying to find arguments that make a decolonizing project, projects that are particularly friendly to indigenous theology, what could help make those projects plausible to them. And the third part of the paper today, I'm going to talk about that. So that's a lot of intro, but let me just say, it'll go fast after that. There's going to be three parts to the paper. First part, I have a thesis. White theologians need to receive native perceptions of white culture with regard to land and place if they are to avoid colonizing habits in their research exchanges with native culture. White theologians need to receive native perceptions of white culture if they're going to avoid colonizing in their research exchanges with native culture. I'm going to explain all of that as I go through. Second thesis is, if white theologians accept native perceptions of whites with regard to land and place, then the most important agenda for theology of land by white theologians, especially in the United States, is reparations. And then the third part of the paper, which will be the shortest part, but I do need to talk about it briefly, not a thesis, but a burden. What will help, as I talked about earlier, what will help folks, what will help particularly white evangelicals that I have to talk to all the time, what will help them make this plausible for them? What are the kinds of strategies? So, and maybe all of that will be woven together in one big gift, we'll see. So part one has 4 steps. I'm just going to explain each step, and then we'll talk about them each briefly. The person I find most helpful as we're thinking about race and place is a theologian and a theorist named Willie Jennings. And he talks about the connections between race and place that I think in a very deep way, in a way that helps us understand what's going on that corner experience I had in 2009. And then he also suggests a way out of the problem that we have in North America, but especially in the United States, how to remedy our current situation with race and place in relationship to indigenous culture. The third, though, is that when I see the way he provides this remedy, and other people do as well, which I'll talk about, there are pitfalls, particularly for white folks who want to engage in this kind of project. And then fourth, how to remedy the remedy, okay? So there's how can white folks find ways to decolonize, but then there are these tricky spots you have to engage in as you do it. So the 4 steps, Willie Jennings. Let me just say a little bit about Willie Jennings' work and how it helps us with this race and place conversation. So Willie Jennings, in the book The Christian Imagination, which is a very important book, if you haven't read it, you should, although it's very hard, so it'll take you a while and you gotta be patient. It's good for you, but it's hard. The basic thesis, or their one way of reading the book, is that Western social imagination that is empowered by Christian theology and Christian practice is diseased. There is a diseased social imagination. And he talks about this diseased social imagination as something that is not in step with the early church or the New Testament church, or more particularly the church that you see in Acts. In Acts, he sees a social imagination where Jews and Gentiles can both be Jews and be Gentiles and be related to each other. Jews don't have to give up eating kosher. Gentiles can still eat pork, and they can still eat with one another. And he says that in the book of Acts, you have a social imagination where you can still be yourself, but be joined and enfolded with one another as you're committed to Christ in obedience. And he said that in his particular experience in the Christian churches in the United States and North America, he doesn't see that happening very often. And the book opens with a particular experience in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is kind of what I would call the headquarters for the tradition that I come from, the Dutch Reformed tradition, the Christian Reformed Church. And he tells a story at the beginning of the book where he is living in Grand Rapids, or growing up in Grand Rapids, and he's in his backyard with his mother gardening, and a couple of white Christian Reformed church folks come into his yard to tell him what church they ought to go to, even though their family had been a part of a church and had a long standing in church for many, many years. And he was wondering, how is it they think they need to shuttle us over to their church even though we have a long-standing tradition on our own? In other words, there's a diseased social imagination and practice that he couldn't find in the book of Acts, and he's wondering, what is the disjunct? Well, the basic disjunct is, for him, the racial scale that emerges in modern discourse and practice. What's the racial scale? Many of you are familiar with this. The top of the scale is white folks. The bottom of the scale is black folks, or black, okay? And it's an immutable racial scale. White folks on top, black folks on the bottom. There could be red in between or yellow in between, but black are at the bottom, white is on top. And the meaning of white, the meaning of black, the meaning of anything in the middle, you might say, is changeable. But the scale is always going to be there, okay? So for example, white folks might be defined by a particular kind of music in 1650, but they're going to be defined by a different kind of music in 1950, but the point is that the whiteness has to stay stable and the blackness has to stay stable, okay? So he said this immutable racial structure emerges in the 15th century Portugal. That's debatable, but that's where he actually locates it. And he says what he noticed about that is that stability of Christian culture, stability of racial culture is different from what's going on in Acts, where the ethnic identities are stable, but they're in flux. You can eat kosher or you can eat pork, but you can flex enough in your eating that you can eat with somebody who won't want to eat like you do. Okay? So the racial structure is immutable, can't be changed, where he saw in Acts that these cultures were changeable in relationship to Christ. So, what he's saying with this particular racial structure and the particular gift of his book is that he's saying that this is also a problem of and is tied to a problem of place. So race and place are connected in this way. The whole idea of blackness is a construction, but it's a construction because it's an abstraction from place. A person could be a black person because they are not a person from a tribe, from a particular region in Africa, et cetera, okay? So blackness is an abstraction from place. Traditionally, you were a person who was from this tribe in this particular place in relationship to these particular animals and these particular plants. And race is a way to erase all of that identity and carry your identity on your body, so to speak. So race is an abstraction from place. If you had place, you wouldn't have race, is what he was saying. Now, if that's the case, that means that race is like squishing your identity into the color of your body, when your identity is supposed to be supposedly more spread out over history and through the landscape in which you live. So race is an abstraction from place, and thus it makes it durable, almost immutable. You can't change it. You're always going to be black, white, red. Okay? Now, this is not just for black folks, but of course white folks. Europeans come to the United States and they become eventually white. Now, I am from a Dutch immigrant stock, okay? My name is Keith Starkenberg. That's actually a German word, German name, Starkenberg, which means something like strong fortress or strong mountain. My particular family name comes from a particular area in Germany that was sometimes a part of the Netherlands and sometimes not. In the United States, it's just a fun, cool name. It's not a name that tells you who I am in relationship to a place. In America, I grow up thinking I am a white person, as opposed to Keith, the person from the strong mountain or fort. Okay? So whiteness is also an abstraction from place. All of race is. All right, so what are we going to do about this? Okay, so that's the big problem. Race and place are connected to each other. If you had place, you wouldn't have race. So what do we do now that we're stuck in this weird, immutable reality? Well, his way of thinking about it is to say that, is to trace it back to its roots. And one of the roots, he says, of this problem is supersessionism, or a weird, disfigured relationship between Jews and Gentiles. When the Christian church decided that the Christian church was going to supersede Israel as a site of God's salvation, that made it possible for race and place to be abstracted in this way. What is he getting at? It means this, is that Jewish people, Israel, is identified by the land. Once you supersede the Jewish and Israel's identity, part of what you're doing is you're saying that the people of God are no longer defined by their connection to land, the land, wherever you are. And so supersessionism is a part of the roots of this problem. Okay, but what do you do now that you're seeing the roots of the problem and you see the problem as we're standing? What he does is he points to a particular remedy. One remedy is going to be, how can Christians work to have a non-supersessionist theology? That's one part of the remedy. The part of the remedy I want to point out to you today is the part with regard to indigenous theology and culture. What he does is he points in the book, and not in an extensive way, he points in the book to Native American cultures or indigenous cultures, and he says, if we're going to relearn what it means to have an identity that's reconnected to place, which then will allow us to remedy the problem of race, we need to look towards Native American cultures with regard to land and place. Why? Because he says there are still places in Native American culture where you see that resonance, where you see that collective identity in relation to place. If we can learn, as folks in the United States and North America, from indigenous cultures, we can maybe alleviate the problem of race and place at the same time. Maybe. The other reason he wants this sort of thing to happen is because if white folks in particular, but Europeans more broadly, can actually learn from indigenous cultures, it reverses the modern missionary story. In other words, white folks were telling other folks how to follow Jesus before. Now, finally, indigenous can tell white folks how to follow Jesus in their particular lands. So he's like, listen, we've got to find a way to learn from indigenous cultures. Okay, now, here's the problem. Before I say what the problem is, let me just say that a lot of other people have similar ideas. For example, Vine Deloria points to the fact that there's all this interest in Native culture, and this interest in Native culture does help people think about their own environment in more responsible and healthy ways. And he's like, I can't complain about that. You recognize that that's a function. Randy Woodley as many of you know. His book points to this very need at the beginning of the book and says, white folks have a particular spiritual difficulty with regard to land, and this is the book that might help you, or a book that will help you along to solve or to alleviate this spiritual difficulty. Sounds a lot like what Willie Jennings is saying. And then Robin Wall Kimmerer, if you haven't read this book, most of you probably read the book, Braiding Sweetgrass, but if you haven't, it should be on your list for the next month. It's one of the best books I think that's been written in English in the last 10 years. It's amazing. And one of the things she points out to is she's trying to find a way to help North Americans, but especially folks in the United States, become indigenous again. So you're sort of finding this thread. This is a remedy that people are looking for. If we're going to heal with regard to land and place, then we're going to have to attend to indigenous culture. But here's the problem. So last summer, I was on a trip in South Dakota on Rosewood Reservation, and I was trying to find ways to decolonize. So I was on a trip with Doug Anderson and a number of other people to try to think through how the Lakota culture thinks about land and place, what the larger Lakota history is about, to try to just understand it better so that when I'm writing about it and thinking about it, I was sort of putting myself under scrutiny. One of the native leaders that we encountered there, that I encountered there, could smell a white man from a mile off, basically. And at one point during this week, he approached me and he said, "You need to stop looking at our culture for ways to solve the problems in your own. You need to stop looking at our culture for solving the problems in your own." And he actually used the word, "You should stop trying to consume us." Okay? So, yeah, I'd read some books on decolonizing methods, but when I was confronted in that way, I had to say, okay, something about what I'm doing here needs to be stopped, rethought, reframed. And others have thought similar things. Critical theorist Bell Hooks wrote an important essay called Eating the Other. And she refers to this movement in white cultures where they're starting to look to black cultures in particular. She's an African American woman. Black cultures in particular, and they're starting to look at it as something that they can consume or commodify for their own enjoyment. And they think that what they're doing is getting beyond racism, but instead what they're doing is they're reaffirming that particular racism. So she uses words like the other, or black Americans, are going to be eaten, consumed, and forgotten. Partly what she's saying is that immutable that immutable racial scale is not going to be changed if all you're doing is consuming indigenous or black culture, or the culture of the other. Deloria also talks about anthropologists or other researchers who have for years been visiting the reservations in South Dakota and other places and keep asking folks who they are, what they're doing, like I was doing last summer, who they are and what they're doing, and saying, who are you and what you're doing? And it's sort of like this constant onslaught of research in these particular contexts. They are ideological vultures, benefiting in their scholarship and their publishing through all their grants, et cetera, on the backs of the indigenous folks, and supposedly for the benefit of those indigenous folks. So other folks have seen the pitfalls of this particular remedy. Jennifer Harvey, in her work on critical whiteness, and this is what I'm talking, when I say a white theology of land, I'm not trying to say, hey, let's stick to our white guns here. That's not what I mean by that. It's time now that we start to actually narrate what it means to be white in a critical way, okay? Attend to our own culture, so to speak. That Native leader was asking me to think about how I approach land and what it is about my own white culture that made it possible for me to do what I do. Give an account of yourself. Jennifer Harvey says, if we simply look to indigenous cultures to solve our problems, then what we're doing is we're recolonizing, we're using them for our own benefit, okay? Now, 3 steps, suggesting the remedy, the pitfalls, and then how do we remedy the remedy? There's just a couple things I want to say. Bell Hooks points out that whatever's going on here has to be mutual. So white folks cannot simply go to indigenous cultures and say, hey, let me look at you and imagine all the cool things that you have in your culture that I can sort of take into my own to remedy my own problems, okay? That's not mutual, it's unilateral, okay? It has to be something that's happening negotiated between equals, they both have power and they both have some influence on one another. But how do you do that? I think the best person to look at for this kind of thing is a philosopher named George Yancey. He's an African-American philosopher, and one of the things he's been pointing out is he wants to make whiteness visible. Okay? Now, how do you make whiteness visible? Well, you do some of the things I was just talking about. You're trying to make an account for why white folks do what they do, and white folks tend to think about why they do what they do. Why do we dress the way we do? Not just why do you have feathers, but more like why do you not have feathers? Okay? Not why do you have drums, but why do you use an organ? Okay? In other words, you got to find ways to think about your own whiteness and figure out what it is about your culture that makes it what it is. But that itself won't be enough, because sometimes what you're doing is you're using indigenous cultures as a tool of comparison to your own. Okay? Now, he suggests then that the only way to get out of this in the end, to kind of get out of this crazy scenario where white folks are using native cultures for their own ends, is for other folks from what he was, in his particular context, from black cultures, to tell white folks how they're seeing white folks. Okay? So he's saying, listen, white folks are not going to be able to see themselves, even if they look over there and compare it to themselves. They're only going to be able to see themselves if they speak to somebody face to face who is from another culture, either literally or metaphorically, and they're going to have to say, what do you see when you see me? Okay? The script has to be flipped. Not, what do you do when you beat the drum? White person saying to the indigenous folks. Not just, well, look it, they do the drum and I don't do the drum, I do this instead, but instead they stand up and say to me, when I see a white person with regard to land and place, this is what I see. Okay? So we have to find a way to remedy the remedy by allowing other cultures to see white culture and then open up white culture so that it can be healed. Okay, part one. Part two, this will go faster. Maybe you should take a break. Ready? No, just kidding. Part two, what white theologians and their white audiences need to see. So if we are trying to receive Native American perceptions of white folks with regard to land and place, what is it that they are going to say to us? I'm no expert on this. I've only been working on this the last few years. I can be corrected on this. Please tell me lots of other things, but this is what I am hearing. 3 things I am hearing when I hear Native folks looking at white folks dealing with land and place. I hear 3 big things. First thing is this. The first thing is this, that when Native or indigenous folks look at white folks, especially in the United States, they see white occupiers of their homeland. Okay? When indigenous folks or Native folks look at white folks, one of the things they think is, or one of the things they see is, you are an occupier of our homeland. Or another way to put it, which is maybe not quite so stark and maybe not quite so severe as what Randy Woodley says, and other people have said it's been said here, is you are living on stolen land. Maybe you're not quite an occupier, but you're living on the benefits of stolen land. So that's one thing that natives and obviously indigenous folks are seeing with regard to whites and with regard to land and place. Second thing, in my experience, when indigenous folks look at white folks with regard to land and place, the other thing they're seeing is a weird relationship to the land, okay? So one has to do with how white folks have enclosed the land, but I want to point out is more what Joseph Marshall III says, is that white Europeans, they tend to alter their physical environment to suit their lifestyle. So he tells this great story when he was growing up, South Dakota. He tells this great story where his grandfather shared a fence line with a white neighbor, okay? Now this fence line was broken. Now, why was the fence line broken? The fence line was broken because there were some chokeberry shrubs which had grown up and broken the fence, and inside the chokecherry trees, chokecherry bushes, there were meadowlarks who lived there. So the vegetation had broken the fence apart, and so there was now a gap in the fence. What did Marshall's grandfather do? What he did was he took the fence apart and he rebuilt the fence around the shrubs so that the shrubs could live and so could the birds inside the shrubs. About a week later, the white rancher who lived next to him saw this arrangement, and what he did in order to solve the problem with regard to the fence was he got his big tractor out and he rode over the shrubs and over the meadowlarks, and he rebuilt the fence right over top of where the meadowlarks and the shrubs were. Okay? So Joseph Marshall says, when we see white people, we see folks who are willing to alter the environment to suit themselves as opposed to altering themselves to suit the environment. Okay? And then third thing, the first two seem very accusatory and they're tough to listen to at times, I think, but the third is this, that when Native folks and Indigenous folks see white folks, they also see their relatives, and we've heard about this here. Albert Whitehead Jr., we are related to everything on earth and in the universe. We were formed from the blood of Indian, human, animals, trees, water, air, stones, and Randy Woodley, all people and all things are related to each other. So in other words, we are all related, and Indigenous and Native folks are seeing white folks as those who aren't acknowledging that we are related, but we're not living in accord with that relationship. Now, if that's how Native folks perceive white folks, what do we do about that? How do we receive it? What does a white theologian and a white practitioner do with that? One of the places I look in the Bible to help my students try to think through these kinds of things is the story of Peter and Cornelius in Acts 10. Many of you are familiar with the story. Okay? It's a key story in the book of Acts because it allows Jews and Gentiles to have that enfolded community that Willie Jennings talks about. And the one thing that I've found helpful to kind of help students think about how to receive viewpoints like that you find in Indigenous culture with regard to white culture in relation to land and place is to look at Cornelius as an example of this. Now, I just want to set up a couple things. I'm kind of playing Bible scholar. I'm a systematic theologian. But I have to, like I say, when I'm teaching my students and the people I'm with, I have to read the Bible in a very concrete way. So the Bible scholars out there can do their own research and prove me wrong, but I think I have a point. So hold on with me. One of the things I notice about Cornelius in Acts is that the book of Acts, at the beginning of Acts 10, it emphasizes that Cornelius is a very virtuous person, okay? He was a devout man who feared God with all his household. He gave alms generously to the people and prayed constantly to God. He already knew God before he became a Jesus follower, okay? Your prayers and alms have ascended as a memorial before God. Before he heard anything about Jesus, God had heard his prayers, and Cornelius had a distinctive, positive relationship with God. Now, once Cornelius encounters Peter face to face, there is this famous moment where Peter arrives and Cornelius meets him and he falls on his face, and one translation of the text says that he worshiped Peter. But one of the things I want to notice is that when Cornelius interacts with the angel at the beginning of the book of Acts, he doesn't fall down, okay? When Cornelius is speaking to an angel at the beginning of the book of Acts, he doesn't fall down and worship the angel. But when Peter shows up at Cornelius' household, Cornelius falls down before him and worships him, perhaps. Now, why is it that Cornelius would know? Why is it Cornelius would know not to bow down to an angel? Why is it that Cornelius would know not to bow down to an angel, but he doesn't know not to bow down to a human being, Peter? Why is that? Well, many biblical scholars say that he's just a silly Gentile who's used to worshiping human beings. And so when Peter shows up, Cornelius makes the same mistake and Peter has to correct him. But maybe it's better to say, and some scholars will actually make this translation, that what Cornelius was doing was honoring Peter. That when he was bowing down before Peter, he wasn't worshiping Peter, but what he was doing instead was he was honoring a holy man in front of him, and holy men are meant to be respected and honored. And that also was a biblical tradition. 1 Kings, 2 Kings, when the prophet showed up, people would bow down before them, and there was no correction. So Cornelius, when he interacts with Peter, is willing to bow down. Why is he doing that? Well, it seems to me he's honoring him, but he's also what he's doing is he's trying to find a way to deal with his own occupier status, okay? He's a Gentile, and he's an occupier. Now, what are you going to do if you follow the same God of the Jews in whose land you occupy, and whose occupation you enforce with your own life? What are you going to do? If Peter and Cornelius are going to have a relationship, Cornelius is going to have to do something about it. The text says that he worshiped God, but the text also notes that he gave his alms to the people, his money. And it says, of course, here that Cornelius bowed down to Cornelius and honored him. If Cornelius was to be a worshiper of God and somebody who was a worshiper of God as an occupier, these are the kinds of things you would expect him to do in repentance. Or, as Willie Jennings says, this is Cornelius submitting and submersing himself in the life of another, which is the life of Peter and the life of the Jewish people in Christ. So, which brings me to reparations. You can already feel where it's going. If white folks are going to engage with indigenous culture with regard to land and place, if they're going to do that, the first thing on our agenda cannot be, let's find amazing things in indigenous cultures with regard to land and place that will make us better. That's not our first agenda. Our first agenda is to deal with the troubled relationship we have with indigenous folks with regard to the land. And if we're going to do that, we're going to have to do the kind of thing that Cornelius did, which is to give of ourselves, fall down before those that we have wronged, and allow ourselves to be lifted up by those who we have wronged. What kind of reparations? It cannot just be money. If white folks are going to have any kind of, are going to move forward, white Christians in particular, white theologians are going to have to actually focus their theology of land and place on reparations that include the land itself. It cannot just be money. Why can it not just be money? If you're are paying attention at all to indigenous culture, you know that indigenous culture, as we've been saying a number of times today and last night, indigenous culture is a culture that is identified by its very place. Joseph Marshall was saying, we belong to the land does not belong to us. So if reparations are going to occur, it can't be on the level of money. And the Black Hills of South Dakota are a good example of that. Many of you may know that there was actually a settlement. The United States government recognized that that they broke a number of treaties in taking the Black Hills from Lakota and other tribes, and they tried to give the Lakota people about $100 million. The Lakota people said, no, we won't take the money, and to this day they haven't. And there's about $1.4 billion just sitting there because the Lakota people aren't willing to take the money in lieu of the land. It cannot just include money, it has to include the land as well, at some level. Now, what I'm trying to say at this is I really don't know what the reparations should be, but white folks have to be open to land being part of it. There's no way around that. So the burden. What sort of approaches will help white Christians receive the gift of these native perceptions with regard to land and thus reparations? What I would want to say, the Cornelius story is one way of doing it, but the other thing I want to say is when I look at the book of Acts, Acts 15 is a ratification of what happened between Peter and Cornelius, and what I notice in the book of Acts is that there are different kinds of approaches different ways that the Spirit used to unite Jew and Gentile culture in Acts 15. They didn't just argue from Scripture, they did different things. The first thing they did was they had testimonies of God's Spirit. There were testimonies about how the Spirit worked in the Gentiles. There were testimonies of Jews about how the Spirit was working in the Jews, and those testimonies carried weight. The second thing they did was they did argue from Scripture. God did something back here, and now in this particular time, God is doing something similar here. This must be the same God at work. And then the third thing they do, which I think is important, is the text says that they kept silence. In other words, as they heard these stories and heard these arguments, they were able to keep silence and take it in and listen. So 3 things it seems need to happen if white folks are going to actually have a way of doing a theology and practice of land and place, is that they have to be able to tell their own stories, hear stories from other folks, argue from Scripture, and then keep silence. Now that's very abstract, but I want to put it in one concrete example. In this concrete example, I think the Native leader who confronted me last summer, I think he is right, that white folks need to think about how it is that their own culture has places of renewal in it. But then I think what has to happen is that those places of renewal have to be bridges to what's going on in indigenous culture. Okay? Randy Woodley says a similar thing. So you got to look in a European native white culture for the theology and a practice of place that can then become a bridge to making plausible what it is that indigenous folks are doing. One of the places I think that is helpful here is the work of Gerald McDermott and Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards is not a person I would think of as a kind of a champion of indigenous rights in the modern world, not at all. But I think there's stuff in his theology that can be used as a bridge to help folks, white evangelicals in particular, make this transition or make a bridge over to what's going on with regard to indigenous theology and practice of land. One of the questions he asks is, the Bible says that Jesus is the light of the world, this metaphor, Jesus is the light of the world, or Jesus is the Son of righteousness. How is it that the Bible is willing to call Jesus the light of the world or the Son of righteousness? Why is that? What makes that metaphor workable? Well, what Jonathan Edwards, in the words of Gerald McDermott, who's a scholar of Edwards, points out is, the sun never diminishes in light or heat throughout the ages, which shows the all-sufficiency and everlastingness of God's bounty and goodness. So what Edwards and McDermott are saying is, God made the sun, the Creator made the sun, and God made the sun to endure, and the enduringness of the sun was a way for God to tell us, to show us, and allow us to experience God's own generosity, and that was a way to prepare us for Jesus Christ, who is the light of the world. So the sun is created as an avenue to God's life and God's generosity, which allows us to understand and experience Jesus Christ as the light of the world. This is similar to what we see in someone like Joseph Marshall. He tells a story, it's a traditional story in Lakota culture, of a young boy who grows impatient watching a large herd of bison crossing a river for close to a day. In other words, they have to sit at a river because they have to wait for the bison to cross. And he talks to his grandmother and he says, why do we have to wait? Can't we just go somewhere else? Let's just go further down the river. We'll get across over there. And the grandmother says, no, be patient. The last animal will eventually cross the water. While you are watching them, remember that you are seeing how the earth can be endlessly generous. Be sure your generosity is the same. Okay? So what you're seeing here is this Lakota grandmother is saying to the boy, the water, the bison, that whole event, listen, watch, learn. We need the river, the bison need the river. The whole context is a sign that the earth is generous. The sun, for Edwards, is a sign that God is endlessly generous. The river, the bison, and the context for the young boy, for the grandmother, is a sign that Mother Earth is endlessly generous. So you can use these bridges in order to make it plausible. But in the end, it seems to me, the bridges may not be enough. Nicholas Black Elk referred to the Black Hills as the center of the earth and the promised land. It's not enough to just find, you might say, parallels in white culture that allow you to heal with regard to land and place. There's going to have to be a way in which white folks can actually experience what Native folks experience at some level, because these particular places are so intrinsic to their identity. There's no way around that, I think. The bridges will get things started, but there has to be a much deeper set of relationships over the long haul that allow white Americans in particular to imagine why it is that they need to offer up the land, or at least be willing to offer up the land in reparation for the history in North America. Jim Perkinson, these are my final comments. Jim Perkinson, who has done an amazing amount of work on critical whiteness in a theological context, writing particularly about the relationship between white folks and black folks in the United States, he says, white people cannot become black. We could put another word in there. White people cannot become native, okay? They can, however, in encounter with others in their spiritual and cultural depths, become more than just white. Or in the words of Robin Wall Kimmerer, white folks cannot become native. You're just being white when you do that. But as Robin Wall Kimmerer would say, we can become naturalized to place. Not native, but naturalized. We can be both white and non-white at the same time. Thank you for listening this afternoon. Curious about all of your comments.
I, as with many of you, are significantly relieved, I'm sure, to realize that we do not, once again, have to take a white theology on. That's really cool. Thank you. All right, come on. I know it's after lunch, but chill. All right, questions? Anyone? Chris has the mic, so if you have a question or to direct, right up here, Chris.
Where am I going? I didn't see anybody.
Ray, put your hand up, if you would, so Chris knows. Yep.
Thanks for that. It might be a bit of a difficult question to respond to, but I just want to ask a question about a decision that was made in 1891 by Chief Justice Marshall.
Yeah.
In regards to the Piankinshaw people and, well, it was Johnson versus McIntosh. My understanding, and I'm coming from Australia and looking at all of this, is that after the Civil War, the American people needed a way of owning the property. But this particular decision, the Marshall decision, in McIntosh versus Johnson versus McIntosh, today has become property law, the basis of property law.
Yeah.
Because the Crown had gone, so you needed some kind of a legal basis for that. Do you think that the white American people would ever overturn that, or would the church have an attempt at overturning the Marshall decision back in 1891 to bring back into focus what the Piankinshaw people as well as Johnson had achieved?
Yeah. I know. I mean, my sense in the United States is that one of the reasons that's hard for us to, okay, so we have an apology. Many of you may know the United States has an apology, but it was like snuck in a bill and it wasn't announced. There was no formal process like you've had in Canada, for example, right? With regard to truth and reconciliation or conciliation, as Mark Charles has put out. And why is it that white America is so afraid of this, right? Why is it? Just what makes them so afraid? And what I think is that there's two places where reparations need to be dealt with, and the combination of those two things makes it just really hard for white folks in particular to actually countenance a shift here, okay? And what I mean by that, of course, is reparations are needed with regard to black folks, former slaves in America, but also with regard to Native and Indigenous folks. Once you put reparations on the table for Native folks in the United States, all of a sudden reparations with regard to slavery are on the table as well, and that is way too much for a lot of white folks in the United States to process. Too much is on the table. But at the same time, the doctrine of discovery is abhorrent and it needs to be overturned theologically and through the church's activism and different ways and that sort of thing. That's where the churches need to find a way to have a voice, and some have, of course. My own particular, where I've got my own stock, the Christian Reformed Church made a statement about this, but it was kind of a halfway statement that didn't have a lot of punch to it. But it's just because, and it's also because we have a hard time processing, well, many different things, but the other thing we have a hard time processing is there are some places in the Christian Reformed Church where I'm from where there was some reconciliation projects on a small scale, and in those communities they started saying that was enough. We did a little truth-telling in our little crew of people. We did enough truth-telling with regard to the residential schools, for example. That's all we need. But the issue of the land was never really dealt with in our church and still continues to be an issue. So I would say for me, though, it's just too much for white Americans to be like, oh man, reparations for the former slaves and for indigenous folks. It's like, whoa, that puts our whole American project in question. And it does, okay? It's just too much. But if we can find a way to reground it in scripture and testimony and silence, I don't know. It's just my way of trying to approach the problem in our particular context.
As someone who is Black and Indigenous, thank you for the work that you're doing. A question I would have for you is, how would you encourage people like me who are tired of having to reflect back? I'm also American, so who is living in Canada, and so like, what encouragement would you have for people that are tired?
No, that is a super good question. I was having a conversation with a young divinity student who's an African American at a divinity school in the United States, and we had a coffee a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about this stuff, and he said to me, I won't tell you who it is, but he said to me, you know this thing that the Christian colleges have and other places have where you're trying to get a certain quota of Black folks in order to feel good about diversity? He's like, we're kind of had enough of that, okay? And that's part of what he's saying is like, listen, Black folks, Native folks do not exist for white people to figure it out. And so I don't think that there's a particular burden on Native folks or Black folks to sort of befriend and find a way to befriend white folks so you can heal them of their whiteness. I don't think that's an agenda at all. The burden is on white folks to find ways to reach out through art, through stories, through whatever means they have possible to find ways to put their own whiteness under critique. Does that make sense? If God sees fit to bring together people in friendship, amazing. But I don't think there's some kind of calling on all Black folks, or from my perspective, please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a particular calling on all Native folks and all Black folks to show white people what's wrong with them necessarily. It might be that certain people have that particular calling, but it's not this universal. We should be relieved of that guilt and shame, I think. Okay? But white folks don't ever get out of it. We're done. It's the thing we're going to need to do until we can become both white and non-white at the same time. Does that make sense?
One more?
I was at Washington, D.C. with standing in the gap with the Promise Keepers. Someone invited me, so I went. And it was an apology to Native Americans, this theme. And after it was over, I had so many white people saying, I'm sorry, and they're crying on my shoulder. I felt so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know what you...
No, exactly.
I wasn't expecting that.
No,
and there wasn't a lot of Native Americans there, so...
Yeah. Right.
There wasn't enough of me to go around.
Right.
But...
Right. No. Those of you who watched the protest with regard to the Dakota Access Pipeline, many of you might have followed that a little bit. There were these spontaneous apology ceremonies popping up there because these white folks showed up and they like had all this guilt and shame built up and they didn't know what to do with it. Those are useful for the white folks, not for the other folks, obviously, is what you're saying. Yeah. What that is a cheap substitute for a collective governmental effort to tell the truth about our history and find ways to change and remedy that history.
And I realized that our own people are dealing with their own historical trauma from boarding school and residential school, but also, post-traumatic stress syndrome. So I always said our people all of them need a couch. Yeah. But then I started looking at the bigger picture that whites need that too. Yeah. But they need it for a different reason. Yeah. Maybe for perpetrator-induced traumatic stress. Right. Because they're perpetrators to blacks, in Vietnam, where I think a lot of this came about, but to Native Americans. So they need the couch too. But we all fall short of the glory of God. So. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I wasn't trying to say that other groups. I wasn't trying to say that non-white groups do not contain sin or anything like that. What I'm saying is that there's a particular whiteness, or there is a particular sin or power called whiteness that needs to be unworked and maneuvered around and dealt with in a collective way. That's what I'm trying to get at. So I'm not trying to say that like white folks have more kind of individual sin necessarily than other folks, and so no, that's not what I mean. There is a collective issue with regard to the history, though. That needs to be dealt with in a collective way. Okay?
In terms of the reparations, I wanted to suggest that I don't know that the reparations necessarily needs to be framed in terms of what white people will accept. Oh, sorry. For instance, the Native American Boarding School Healing Project consciously adopted the frame of reparations, not so much because they thought white people would like it, but was a strategy to start actually engaging in solidarity with black people struggling for reparations for slavery, and to develop relationships that way, as well as to develop solidarity with movements in the global south also seeking reparations around the third world dead. So reparations can be a politics around solidarity that maybe perhaps decenters whiteness rather than whiteness being the decider of whether or not it's a good strategy.
We don't have to wait. No one has to wait for white people. It's just that I'm a white person, and I got to talk to them. So I got to find a way to do what we can there. That's all I'm saying. We do not have to wait for white people. We don't.
Good.
We don't.
Keith, thank you. Let's give Keith thanks. So Keith, I know not every African American, African Canadian, Latino, Asian American, Asian Canadian, or Indigenous person wants to take on white people, but you'll find a few here. So I'm just teasing. I got a laugh out of him. I just want you to know that. He's got that reformed. It's kind of like the Mike Hogaterp thing going on here, right? You got to really work at getting that smile to broaden a little bit, a little chuckle to come. Keith, thank you very much. Appreciated the drive of the paper, and I mean it's an important thing to frame, isn't it? And to try and rethink the paradigm of how we engage not only theologically. Because we're constantly battling the need to insert an Indigenous theological or an African American or Canadian or other theological perspective in this vast space of whiteness that seems to be the arbiter of theological orthodoxy. And so the same kind of thing that you've talked about. So that's great. Thank you very much. Momentarily, we're going to invite Mary Lou Maisonneuve to come and present the second paper before we take our talking circle break, and that'll give us a couple of extra pieces of reflection to discuss. Come on up, Mary Lou. And I think give us some rich conversation. And so, Mary Lou, we're grateful that you're here. We're thankful that you took the time to put this paper together and reflect on this and to come to this rather risky place and be among us. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
So you could tell by the kiss that Mary Lou is a Francophone Indigenous woman. The double cheek. I hope that doesn't mean you're cheeky, but
I don't know what that means.
So let me just give you a little bit of background for Mary Lou. So Mary Lou is completing a master's degree in religious studies with a concentration in feminist studies at the University of Quebec in Montreal. She focuses her research on healing, demand, and agency by Innu women attending the Baptist Evangelical Church in the community of, I'm not even going to try this name. It's an Innu name. I'm Mi'kmaq. I can't do this. Sept-Îles in Quebec. Mary Lou self-identifies as a Métis, Anishinaabe, and Quebecoise woman, and we were pretty thrilled to have her submit this paper, and so we're looking forward to hearing from you, Mary Lou. Thank you.
Thank you. What a warm welcome. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm just gonna place my stuff here. How much time do I have? 30 minutes? No. Okay, I'm just gonna sit then. 20? 40? Okay. Not kidding, not joking right now? Okay. Okay. 350. Okay. 50 or 15? 15. Okay. Okay, so I just want to start. I know that yesterday we did a territorial acknowledgement, but not being from here, I was looking for the appropriate territorial acknowledgement for Toronto. I don't know much about Toronto territory, so I then heard for the first time about the dish with one spoon wampum belt. Which symbolizes the treaty between the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory that we stand on today and protect the land. One dish means one territory to feed on, and one spoon meaning that we have to leave enough for others. When I heard about it, I was like, wow, that's genius. Like, I can only salute the political intelligence and wisdom of Indigenous leaders of that time. So, does it work? It doesn't work. So maybe I can just say when to change? Maybe I'm not. Oh, it's not, it wasn't on. Okay, now it's on. So the title of my presentation is Being Christian and Innu is a Reconnection with the Land Possible. And I'm proposing a historical and anthropological analysis because that's what I'm good in. So just so you have an idea of the presentation outline. So I'm going to talk first about land and the traditional Innu way of life. Sedentarization and altered relation to the land, and then being Christian and Innu, what about the land? And then I'm going to finish with a conclusion. So just to give you a little context, okay. What you see here in this blurry map, but it's the best one that I could find, is the territory of the Innu, who are located in northeastern Quebec and Labrador, and they are part of the Algonquian ethno-linguistic family. So land and the traditional Innu way of life. So Innu traditional way of life has always been closely linked to land. What is called Nitassinan, our territory, in Innu Aimun, the Innu language, was not only related to the way of life, but also to the whole religious system, both being intertwined. You see here caribou and the Tewagan and the Kushapichigan, the shaking tent. So let me just, okay, no. So indeed, the traditional Innu religious system was functional and mainly based on the relationship with the animal masters that were called the Ochemawat, that allowed them to find game, especially caribou, on the vast territory and thus eat and survive during harsh subarctic winters. The game was not simply considered like prey, but as the holder and first inhabitants of the land. The animal masters, the Ochemawat, each being in charge of his category of animal, were the ones in command and not the hunters themselves. If hunters did not comply with the animal master's set of rules, they would not send the game to cross the hunter's path. That's how it worked. If they wanted to regain the confidence of the Ochemawat, the Innu had to perform a certain set of rituals involving the Mantushun power or wish power, as it is sometimes called in anthropological works. So this Mantushun power was present in practices such as singing or nikamun and drumming, tewagan, the shaking tent, kushapichigan, and also scapulimancy, assisted by their benevolent spirit, Mishtaper. So the Mantushan power was cumulative, meaning that an old and experienced hunter whom had years of experience in successfully finding game had more power than a young one who had just begun to hunt. So about sedentarization and the altered relation to the land that it brought. So Recollects and Jesuits made contact with the Innu in the 17th and 18th centuries, but the Oblates, so another Catholic order, I think it's called in English too, were the ones to more effectively affect the Innu lifestyle. And starting in the mid-19th century, they evangelized them in a constant way and celebrated various religious services, masses, confessions, baptisms, and communions. So what you see here is, it's a bit small, so I'm just going to read, a late 19th century lithograph of the procession of the Indians at the mission at Sept-Îles. Today, a version of this ritual is practiced among the Innu of La Romaine. So the Canadian government also worked actively at the sedentarization of the Innu with the Indian Act in 1876, as did the Oblates even before in 1847 by building a chapel in the Innu reserve of Ouachat near Sept-Îles. So you see here this chapel nowadays, but it's been there for a while. I'm not sure if it has burned at one point and was rebuilt, but that's the same place where it was built initially in 1847. Daniel Vachon, who's a former Innu chef of the Ouachat Macmanutanam band, remembers that during his childhood, around 1932, his mother, his siblings, and he did not spend the winter in the territory anymore. Only his father would go, so in the 1930s. Economic development, such as building railroads and dams without consulting the Innu and, quote, exploiting and destructing the territory, end of quote, has limited the access to the land and have resulted in adult difficulty to find game. And by the way, this quote, exploding and destructing the territory, is from the great Innu author Anantan Kapesh, if you have heard about her. She wrote in 1976, "I'm a damned savage," or "Je suis une maudite sauvagesse," a political book at a time where Innu were seen and treated as nothing. And in 1976, it was pretty revolutionary to write such a strong word. So the residential school of Sept-Îles that you see on the screen was operative from 1952, some sources say 1951, to 1971, so 20 years. And it may have been the last step leading to the disruption of the Innu nomadic lifestyle. As children would be in residential schools 10 months a year, many parents did not want to go far in the territory or leave them, or like they couldn't be in the residential schools with them, as we know, but sometimes they would camp in front of the residential school, like it happened elsewhere also in Canada. So also the psychological trauma of parents who lost their children and of the children who attended residential schools, many of whom, as we sadly know, were physically or sexually abused. This led to addictive behaviors such as alcoholism and thus disrupted the practice of hunting. So when this sedentarization occurred for the Innu, the relationship with the land carried on, although altered. Even if the Innu were less often on their hunting territory and remained mostly on the coast throughout the year, they continued to use the Mantusian power through the practice of Catholicism. There's no time to elaborate, but let's say that like the Innu traditional religious system, Innu Catholicism was focused on the functional aspect, or as the anthropologist Marie-Pierre Bousquet calls it, a système de pensée pragmatique, or pragmatic way of thinking, as we can translate it. So henceforth, the Mantusian power was still relevant for the problems present in sedentary villages, such as alcoholism and violence, although it was now used via Catholicism. Moreover, this Catholic Mantusian power was also cumulative. Quote from the anthropologist Gagnon, "The more an individual would pray and accumulate pilgrimages, the more powerful his prayers would be, end of quote. So, however, from a Mantushan power anchored on the relationship with the land, it shifted to a Mantushan power focused on solving those new problems. Nitassinan was not at the center of daily life anymore. So being Christian and Innu, what about the land? So as you can see here, this is, how do you say this in English? It's a Christmas nativity scene. Okay, thank you. So a Christmas nativity scene from the church that I'm going to talk to you about, located in Ouachat, Innu church. And you can see there's the Innu tent with all the nativity characters that we know from the Bible. And there's the snowshoes and the logs and the pine tree floor. So just so you look at all the elements. So nowadays, Catholicism has lost its appeal and consensual popularity in Innu communities, but people are still religious in a functional way or have a pragmatic way of thinking. Like many Native communities across Canada, the goal sought out today by the Innu is healing, partly due to all the mistreatments experienced during the residential schools era. So this is an excerpt from the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, investigating Canada's residential schools, and it states that aside from the physical and mental damage these students bore, they were the first to bear what was to become a multi-generational affliction, one that would affect the ability of Aboriginal peoples to embrace their languages, their cultures, and their trusted traditional healing practices. In this way, the residential school system was an attack on the health of generations of Aboriginal peoples, an attack first made visible by the physical scars of sickness and abuse, but also one that continues to punish Aboriginal peoples with a legacy of marginalized lives, addiction, mental health, poor housing, and suicide. So healing is the main reason the Innu adhere to Native spirituality movements, evangelical churches, or remain in the Catholic Church. As people today, these are the three main places where Innu people in Ouachat Makmarutanam go in terms of religion. The three main categories, if we can say. So as people today are searching for healing, we can observe a simultaneous desire, especially among young generations, to reconnect with the land. So for example, the Band Council of Ouachat Makmarutanam has a community department of rights and territory protection, and they have acquired recently in 2018 the Moisi-Nipissing outfitter, which is the Moisi River, or as it's called in Inuimun, the Mishtashipu, meaning the Great River. So this river was used for centuries by the Innu to access Nitassinan and began to be partly privatized in the mid-19th century. So recently, last year, they've acquired back and they've had financial aid from the government of Quebec to do so, and they've acquired back a portion of it, outfitter that was really functional and everything. So now they're in charge of this outfitter. Also, other examples of a young generation to reconnect with the land. Some community members have established a group to map and protect sacred Innu sites on the land. So you can find them on Facebook if you read French. It's called Les Gardiens des Sites Sacrés Inuassi. So the guardians of the sacred site of the territory, Innu territory. So it's a group to map and protect sacred Innu sites on the land. Also, there's an Innu website called Namto Innu, dedicated exclusively to the memory of and knowledge of Nitassinan. And it is said also there's a goal to pass on information that elders have to young generations of Innu people. So these are just a few examples of the desire and actions of Innu individuals to reconnect with the land. But what about Innu Christianity and the land? So I'm currently doing my research, my master's research with the Innu women attending the Evangelical Baptist Church in Washat Makmarutanam, Sept-Îles. Sept-Îles is, I think we've seen it on the map. No. Okay, Sept-Îles is 10 hours drive northeast of Montreal. 10 hours if you go fast. It's more 12 if you're not used to the road. Just be aware. So I want to, so I'm currently doing my master's research in this community. I've done my research field in 2016 and had a baby, and then came back and had difficulties to write my master's thesis. Anyway, people who graduated yesterday, you know what that is. I just want to indicate also that from the age of 8 to 17, I was raised into that church. I'm not Innu myself. I identify as Métis, Anishinaabe, and Québécoise, like Terry said. And that I want to say also that my father is currently the pastor there, and he's watching us, so allo papa. And I think my mom too, allo mama. So that is just to give you a little context, that it's a place where I have, my heart is. To come back to this research, so it is clear that healing is the main goal sought by the women attending that church for their lives. I wasn't expecting this when I did my research field in 2016. I thought about it because I read it in many scholars' texts that healing is really, let's say, popular among Native people in Canada, but I was struck by how it was really omnipresent. Healing is omnipresent in the discourse of many of the 13 women that I interviewed, and that they tend to appreciate particularly time spent for sharing personal struggles. So even during my research time there, they even hijacked my research group's interview to transform it into a healing session between women. So this interview was, I didn't control anything, and that's fine with it. So the church that is called Emu Mamwiton is attempting to answer this healing demand, but does not have consistent contact with the land or a plan to reconnect with it. Indeed, the weekly routine at Emu Mamwiton meaning prayer meeting, is filled with different sorts of meetings and services, but shaped by the adherents, where sharing and praying take a fair amount of time in order to answer the healing needs. So Sunday morning meeting, after there's Tuesday afternoon and night meeting with singing, eating, and Bible reading. Wednesday night prayer meeting. Thursday afternoon women crafting. Friday afternoon meeting with singing, praying, and Bible reading too. Friday night youth group, and Saturday morning breakfast with singing, praying, and Bible reading. So as you see, almost every day has a church-related activity. People can be really busy if they wish to. But these activities do not take place on the territory, but rather either in Washat or Maniyotenam Innu reserves, which are geographically separate from like 20 minutes drive, but administratively one, and which are located in the urban setting of the non-native town of Sept-Îles. However, it is important to note that initiatives to go on Nitassinan, the territory, are not at all discouraged by Emu Mamwiton congregation. They are rather left up to the individual. So during the 3 months of my research in Washat Makmarutanam, 5 women out of 13 have talked to me about the territory, either mentioning that they went, that they would like to go, or that they will go. But none of them talked to me about a collective church initiative to connect more with the land. So could it be beneficial for Emu Mamwiton or any Christian Innu initiative to have a land-oriented approach to Christianity? with their efforts to help people heal from their long-standing psychological, spiritual, emotional, and physical wounds, be more culturally or contextually efficient if coupled with a land-based approach. So an example of a land-based approach by an evangelical Christian group would be the actions of the Canada Awakening Ministry, or CAM, as analyzed by anthropologists Frédéric Laugrand and Jarek Houston. As they argue, more than any other Pentecostal or evangelical group, CAM is particularly preoccupied with the multiple traumas experienced by the Inuit. So just note here, they have worked with the Inuit, not the Innu. It's not the same people. Inuit are up north, Innu are south of the Inuit. And Inuit, as you certainly know, are not part of the Algonquian family. Innu, yes, okay. So they say that CAM is particularly preoccupied with the multiple traumas experienced by the Inuit during the colonial period and the last decades. The healing theme is omnipresent on CAM's blog. It is described as a gradual process. It is said to require the reparation of communication between humans and God, and between humans and their territory. CAM's actions consist in performing land purification rituals and personal or collective healing rituals which borrow components from traditional Inuit shamanism, and by involving not only the younger generations, who are more inclined to participate in CAM's action, but also the Inuit elders who have in the past been refractory or very critical towards CAM. So CAM succeeded in gaining the favor of these elders by taking their side on a conflict opposing Inuit seal hunters to non-Inuit ecology and environment activists. CAM took advantage of this conflict to introduce the notion of biblical environmentalism, which is, according to its leader, Roger Armbruster, more compatible with the Inuit way of life than is the ecology and environment activist ideology. So according to Laugrand and Houston, CAM's strategies are already successful because they have earned the hunters and the elders' respect, and because they are becoming a driving force capable of overcoming denominational and generational divisions and support the Inuit in the reappropriation of their power. CAM has thus become an evangelical Christian movement relevant for the Inuit and their specific preoccupations by integrating not only the concept of healing that many Native people in Canada strive for, but also the concept of territory. So as a conclusion, when we take a look at Innu history and anthropology, we can see that the connection with the land has always been present, although altered with the coming of sedentarization and Catholic Christianity. In the light of how the new generations of Innu want to restore their relation with the land, and how Canada Awakening Ministries succeeds in managing to combine Christianity, healing, and territory with the Inuit, it is valid to say that the Evangelical Baptist Church in Uashat and Innu Christians would benefit from developing an Nitassinan theology. This way, they would certainly be more efficient in answering the healing demand of their attendees, and more relevant for today's Innu reality and spirituality. Furthermore, there is yet to analyze if Innu still have a cumulative and functional way of seeing healing and spirituality. If so, that would be in continuity with the Mantushun power, and it would mean that they have never lost it, even though its use has changed. And then this Mantushun power would be reconnected with the land, with Nitassinan. So such Nitassinan theology, however, has yet to be developed, and it is not my place as a non-Innu to do so. It should preferably and even necessarily be developed by Innu individuals who understand and live in their flesh and their mind and everything, the historical Innu longing for a reconnection with the land, Nitassinan. So thank you. Tchenesh maintenant. Merci. So I think they're running in the front. Yeah. I think there's a question. I don't know where the microphone is.
There you go. Hi.
Hi.
I'm not just a boring business historian, I'm also kind of theological. So I'm really interested in what you're saying about women in this community and how it ties into what Ray was talking about last night, a very sacramental thing. In most denominations, it's only ordained people who are kind of gateways to the sacraments. And in many denominations, it's only men who are ordained. And I think that the assemblies have an all-male ordination stream, is that right?
I'm sorry, I can't really hear.
Okay.
But I think the sound is not so great here, and my French speaking head doesn't.
I had the same problem this morning with Australians.
Oh, okay. Now it's better. So if you could restart from the beginning, that would be nice.
I think there's another interesting paper here that I'd love to read about. A second paper about the development of women's institutions of healing above and beyond traditional Christian male-dominated control of sacramental ministry. And I know that stuff was going on in the Methodist Church amongst settlers 100 years ago. It recurs in various places, but I think that it would be interesting to see if that's what's also happening in this community, that women are organizing ministry in a very sacramental way, based in the land, like Ray was talking about last night, but above and beyond the denominational structure, which is focused on male ordination stream.
You're talking about the Christian, like, are you talking about what it's called?
Christian assemblies, or?
Christian assemblies or spiritual movements, traditional native spiritual movements, like they call them.
I think what I was seeing was a kind of hybrid, or a kind of transplant of, well, that there was a kind of layer of women organizing spiritual activity on top of a structure that was in a particular place, a settled, sedentary place, that works with male ordination stream. You send some guy there to take care of it for a while. But the women actually own what's going on. And your degree is in women's studies or feminist studies, so I figured you probably could speak to that.
Yeah. Tell me if I answer well afterward. But yes, there are, if I could say, initiatives that come really directly from the women. Of what I witnessed, like you saw on my slide, there was women all assembled around the table, and they were doing crafts together. And this was an initiative by two of the Innu women of the church. They did it themselves. They asked the band council for sponsorship to buy the material and everything. They all organized by themselves. And so this is an example of a women initiative that is like they wanted to do their own thing, but it's still it gathers the women of the church, and it's true that the denomination that they're part of, Evangelical Baptist denomination, that's part of I think it's called in Canada I think it's called the Evangelical Baptist Fellowship. They're part of the Quebec branch of it. Yes, there cannot be any women pastor in that denomination. But also, they're not in a liberation rhetoric or liberation to liberate from male domination. They're not in that dynamic in their attendance in the church. I'm reading, I don't know if you know, she's not native, but her name is Sabah Mahmood, and she's written The Politics of Piety, talking about the Egyptian women in the Islamic revival movement who are part of an institution and performing things are seen by liberal feminists in the West as being oppressive to women, and they're performing what is supposed to be humility, manners, or behaviors as a woman. They're fully performing it. But what she argues is that there's an agency to it because it's they're doing little groups of Islamic piety, but in doing so, they're doing theology, Islamic theology, and this is something that usually you don't see. Women don't do theology in Islam. So this is a parallel that I want to make in my master's thesis, that we don't have to always see liberation in everything that women do, but rather see the agency in it and how they perform the norms, but they have a latitude, they open for themselves a latitude for these norms. So yeah, that would be what I have to say about it. Because I want to say too, because if I glued on this situation a liberation feminist ideology, that would be wrong of me because I didn't see it on the field. So that's why.
There's a question at the back. I think if you can stand up.
Hi there. I wanted to thank you so much for bringing this topic to the symposium today. I originally come from Labrador, so I very much relate to what you're talking about. And I too am a pastor's daughter, and my parents have been in ministry in Labrador for over 30 years. So I was thinking, as you were speaking today, I recognize your thesis is connecting healing with reconnecting with the land. Are you looking at that from a solely colonial healing standpoint, or are you looking at that from a religious healing standpoint as well, from the abuses that have been suffered? And I was also wondering if you are looking at other facets to that as well in terms of relational healing within the Christian church as well.
Okay, can you repeat just the last section about the relational healing, please?
Oh, yeah, I was first wondering if you're looking at the two components of healing, the colonial healing as well as healing from the church standpoint, and then from there, are you looking at other facets to how healing can be restored within the Christian church standpoint?
Okay. Mainly, my focus is about healing from the colonial traumas, not so much about the spiritual ones, because in my interviews with the women who, by the way, these women were fantastic because I only had to ask one question and then they started a long monologue that I really wanted for an hour and a half. They were so generous with me. They talked to me about more colonial traumas. So traumas from the residential schools or the consequences of these residential schools, so abuse in the community or alcohol abuse and everything. So this is my main focus. And you talked about also the relational healing, but I'm not sure I would have, I would know what you really meant. But just to say that this is my main focus, because it was, like I told, like I arrived in Uashat Mayutanam thinking, oh, I've read about healing that is something in Native communities across Canada, but I'm not sure I'm going to find this in Uashat Mayutanam. And then what happened was the exact opposite. Women have talked to me about healing all the time. So, and of colonial traumas. So that's my main focus.
I'm coming from the United States, where strange things are happening to the term evangelicalism. And we have talked about naming, and you have renamed that term in this paper for me, and I want to thank you for that. There's new images that come to my mind, thank goodness, with that term because of what you have shown us what's happening. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. I was wondering, it's too bad your parents can't talk, but I was curious, were they surprised by the results of your research, or they say, oh, we've seen that all along?
No, they were surprised. Because when I was young, as a teenager, and Innu people would come to my house, and I was like, oh, there's always people to my house. That's so nice. But I didn't realize as a teenager how precious it was to have that community, because Innu people that attend the church, they had adopted my family, and I didn't realize, and it took like a couple years out of Sept-Îles, pursuing my school after high school, to realize that Innu people had something really close to my heart, and then to realize that I wanted to understand more than just being there as a kid and receiving all the cultural information but not understanding them. So that's why I pursued this master thesis subject. And it's just, they were surprised because they didn't think I would be, well, they didn't see it coming because it happened after I left home. I guess when you're brought up, always comes back to you. So, yeah.
One more? Anyone?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So we're grateful for this afternoon's presenters, since they got us through the hump of the post-lunch group, which I noticed on some of your faces. Zach here is still demonstrating that, sitting in the front. So yeah, thank you, Zach. Okay. All right. So we're going to go to coffee in a moment. Just a few things to bring to your attention. Now that my co-chair, co-MC little sister is back from her, she was taking a lesson out of Ray Minicon's playbook called Walkabout. Here you go. Just a few things. There are some materials in the atrium just as you enter this chapel. There are some things that you can take at your leisure, and other things that we would require that you produce one of those pieces of paper with the picture of some dead president or some dead Canadian parliamentarian or prime minister, or a really cool one, an important woman of Canadian history, Viola Desmond. So if you can produce one of those pieces of paper, you can take away one of those resources, very powerful resources written by some amazing people. Copies of the NAIITS journals are there, $5 a copy for back issues. of the journals, 3 for $12. Well, yeah, I understand. So, do you want to up the price?
It's a gift today.
All right, so this is a gift today. So that's there, as well as some other books and materials. Jerry, where are you, Jerry? Jerry, stand up. So Jerry, that young man at the back, Jerry's a silversmith. He's also a student in the NAIITS program. He's taking his master's in theological studies with us in our Tyndale partnership, and Jerry is a wonderful silversmith. And you'll find some of his work at the back. He has children at home with no shoes, holes in their socks, and all that kind of stuff. So if you can help him out, there's some really wonderful, well-crafted silver jewelry there that you could take advantage of. Also encourage you to take full advantage, again, as I said, of the outdoors here while the weather's warm and it's sunny. When you have the time, the grounds are very much open, and they are wonderful to walk, so please take every opportunity to do that. Yes. That was my next. Okay. So most importantly, we have some Spanish-speaking participants in the conference today, last night, today, tomorrow, and we're wondering if there's anybody who's fluent in Spanish and could participate in a translation with Ismael in particular. If you are, please see us at your earliest convenience. It's bringing pretty clearly to mind, because we're increasing the numbers of Spanish-speaking people that come here, it's bringing to mind the need for us to address that. But if we could do that as an interim, some of you able to translate, that would be really helpful. Lastly, we are going to be circulating, we'll remind you about this again a couple times, we're going to be circulating a poll, an evaluation of the symposium as we've done over the last few years. And we want to ask you to help us to take the things that are good about this and make them better. How do we strengthen this community of conversation? What are some areas that we would like to explore together in the days ahead, and so forth. So as you get that poll, please be diligent to complete it. The more of you who do so, the better the feedback can be utilized to shape the conversations that we bring to the symposiums in particular. Lastly, I want to remind you that at some juncture during the symposium, I would encourage you to indeed follow the very foundational teachings of what a symposium is, and I read in quote, "In ancient Greece, the symposium, from the Greek word sympaine, is to drink together, to get drunk together, to have a banquet where you get drunk together, to enjoy meat and drink and then get drunk together, to have some pleasure in music and then get drunk together, to enjoy some literary works and books and then get drunk together." You know, when we chose, this is sort of going back to this morning's comment about naming. When we chose the name for this thing, none of us knew what it meant. And my son Matt came to me one day a couple of years back and he said, "Hey Dad, do you know what that word really means?" And I said, "Well, I took Greek, but let me think on it a bit." I don't even think Danny Zacharias, who's our Greek king here, would. Anyway, what it encourages is take time to socialize, engage together, meet some new friends, strengthen the bonds with old friends in this community. And by old, I don't mean ancient like me, just friends you haven't seen in a while. Take some time to do that. It's really what makes this community function very, very well. So, coffee break. Let's hope it isn't a traffic jam as it was this morning. I think we've tried to do some changing to that. So coffee is now down in the dining hall where we suggested it be in the first place, and the folks at Tyndale suggested that it would be okay where it was. And I'm not sure that they're used to herding our geese the way that we knew they needed to be. So